Greetings and welcome to another Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team video, where today I'm going over another guide, this time about grenades. But before we get into things, please remember to like and subscribe as well as comment. Let me know what you thought of today's video, if you found it useful and helpful. Remember, I've got a Discord you can check out for free in the episode description below, an affiliate link at Element Games, and an affiliate link discount code at Crossfire Games, as well as a Patreon if you want to give me some more support. But yeah, as I'm doing more guides, for new and experienced players alike, today I'm going to go all about grenades, because I was going to do an equipment guide video and I'll probably do one later, but grenades I think are more something that needs to be covered more in depth and are very useful depending on what kind of faction you're running or playing against. So this video is going to be fully all about grenades of pretty much every kind. So starting off with grenades, I'm talking about the universal equipment grenades. Now you have two types, which are utility grenades and explosive grenades, which can both be selected separately for one equipment point each. But I'm going to start off with utility grenades. So first up, we have the smoke grenade. So with the smoke grenade, when you select a utility grenade, you either select two smokes, 2 stuns, or 1 smoke, 1 stun. Notably, I think the only faction currently that can select more are Phobos Strike Team, who can select up to 4 utility grenades with 1 special equipment choice. But in general, this is what you can run. So first off with smoke grenades, if you select 2, which you usually do if you select utility grenades, for 1 action point, you place one of your smoke grenade markers within 6 inches of this operative. It must be visible to this operative or on a vantage terrain on a terrain feature that's visible to this operative. The marker creates an area of smoke 1 inch horizontally and in limited height vertically, but not from below it. And remember, it's not just a 1 inch bubble. It's a 20 mil marker with a 1 inch bubble. While an operative is wholly within an area of smoke, it's obscured to operatives more than 2 inches from it, and vice versa. So this means when you're shooting out, when someone's shooting into you, you're obscured, but also when you're shooting out inside the smoke, the target you're shooting out counts as being obscured as well, which is something easy to forget. In addition, whenever an operative that is shooting an enemy operative that's wholly within an area of smoke, ignore the piercing weapon roll unless they're within 2 inches of each other. So this is actually a common thing a lot of people forget. The two benefits of being inside smoke is it provides being obscured, but also ignoring piercing. So if you have an ability that ignores being obscured, it doesn't also ignore the piercing. So someone can shoot you with a piercing weapon, ignoring obscurity while you're in smoke, but you still ignore their piercing. And then in the ready step of the next strategy phase, roll 1d3. Remove that smoke grenade marker after a number of activations equal to that d3 have been completed, or at the end of the turning point, whichever comes first. So remember, when you make this roll, this is after someone has decided who is going first in terms of who has initiative, that turning point. So you don't roll for smoke, then initiative. You roll for initiative, decide who has initiative, and then you see how long the smoke lasts. Ideally, you would like 1 activation for the smoke to, ideally you would like 3 activations, because then it means if you're going first, you get it for 1 activation, then it lasts for your opponent's activation, and then it goes away at the end of your 3rd activation. But it's more useful when your opponent takes initiative if it lasts for 3 times, 3 activations, because it means your opponent activates, then it goes to your activation, and then it goes away at your opponent's 2nd activation. But you always plan as if it's lasting 1, and then an operative cannot perform this action while within control range of an enemy operative, or if you have reached the total number of times your kill team can perform it. So remember, you can only do the smoke grenade action twice per game, but you can use it twice per turning point. It's just how many smoke grenades you have. So the main thing with smoke grenades, people usually use it as a way to provide obscurity, but also it's a useful tool to ignore piercing if you don't have ways to ignore piercing. Generally, people will place it after an operative staged up, usually behind heavy cover, but you can use it to stage up behind light cover, because even if your opponent gets onto a vantage to shoot you, that you now get to auto retain either a crit or 2 saves, and you have the obscurity effect and ignore piercing. So it's a great way to stage. Now, another useful way to use smoke grenades is actually to use it as a stepping stone. So what I'm meaning is, let's say you have an operative that can easily get to a piece of heavy cover within their control range with a single reposition, but where you want to stage you can only reach with a reposition and dash, but you don't have the action points to do it in a single activation. What you can do is reposition, let's say 6 inches, get safely with the conceal order within that heavy piece of terrain, then use your action to throw a smoke grenade within 6 inches of the target. and then you can place it where you want to go. So you're kind of using it as a leapfrog. So you're moving up and then throwing the smoke where you want it to go for your next operative or operatives. Because the key thing, it lasts the whole turning point, and then it will last D3 activations at the start of the next turning point. So you could throw it down first activation and it'll be active all turning point, which is great. Now, as I said, this is really useful when running 2 APL teams, because you can move up, throw a smoke, and then have the rest of your team move up and safely stage. And this is the best way to use smokes. Other ways you can use smokes usefully is on Beta Decima. For example, it's very open, and at least being in a smoke, you will count as being obscured. And even if they ignore obscurity, you'll still be ignoring piercing. So there's some help there. Another useful time for it is in Gallowdark, because most of the objectives, at least if you're playing with the Games Workshop maps, are in very open, large rooms just with light cover, and a lot of teams have Seek Light. Now, if you can throw a smoke onto there and then have an operative on a conceal order, at least if you're on a conceal order with smoke, as I said, you get the benefit from obscurity and ignoring piercing. So that's some great staging there. And then another use for it is popping your smoke after you've killed someone. So this is mainly for operatives with free APL. So either free APL base, or they have like comms to give them +1 APL, or can do an extra action for free. So this is what most commonly elites do, where you will charge into someone, fight, kill them, and then drop a smoke. Now, while this does leave you in the open, with a smoke, it's still quite useful. Sure, someone has to get within 2 inches to shoot you and they can turn it off, but then it means they're within 2, and then it allows you to punish more, because if you have another operative staged near that Marine that charged in, now if someone moves within 2, you can then move and dash, reposition and dash to shoot them or charge them again. So you can kind of use this obscurity bubble with the smoke to kind of punish your opponent for getting too close to you. And this is really good also on Gallowdark, because there's not much terrain and there's large open rooms. It forces people who lack ignoring obscurity to get close to you. But it's really good. That's the main staging point and why you use smokes. They're generally the best. They're the most reliable, partly because they last the whole turning point. There's no dice roll. And then you have like some other neat little tricks when you're throwing onto vantages. So you just have to see the vantage point, but you still have to end within 6. So you can throw the smoke that's somewhere not visible on the vantage point, as long as you can see the vantage point, and it ends within 6. So you can just provide safe staging points. It's really good for counteracting stuff that has guard, because as well, for example, you throw the smoke, move into the open, but now instead of just moving this into the open and dropping the smoke, some protection there. Now I'll quickly get onto a fun little game I call how many models you can fit inside a smoke marker. So let's start off with 32mm bases, and the answer is 3. So as you can see in the image above, the following are smoke grenade markers that I've gotten from Crossfire Games, which you can find out in the episode description below. So these are handy. So as you can see, you've got the smoke marker in the middle and then the radius. So this is actually how big a smoke grenade marker is, because a lot of people underestimate how many models you can fit in. Now, generally, if you're running they have to be in a perfect pyramid like this, a trifecta, to get 3 32mm base models. Generally, you can fit 2 32mm models inside a smoke, as long as they're base to base. So that if you want 2, that's fine. 40mm bases, you can only fit 1, but this is really useful when you're trying to stage up. It's really like the common thing I see with smokes. People just throw them at their feet and they don't really consider too much about where you place the token. But for example, let's say where the slasher boy and the comms boy are, they're behind like a light barricade. So from there, you've got 2 people clearly in cover, and then the last operative, while in the open, is now in smoke. So it allows some great staging. But generally, that's a really useful thing. Now, we're not stopping there. We're going down the size. So with 28mm bases, you can actually fit 4 operatives, and you can see they have a little bit more space, so they can probably hug more cover. There's a little bit more maneuverability, but that's the benefit of 28mm. 32mm can fit a max of 3. 28mm bases can fit a maximum of 4. And then finally, we get onto 25mm bases. Now you can fit a maximum of 5 operatives in a smoke with 25mm bases. I'm not sure why. Maybe this is a Void Dancer troop victory dance, like they're just celebrating because they've danced their opponent to death. But it's just something useful. I already knew how many 32 mil bases could fit inside a smoke, but once again, 3 for 32, 4 for 28, and 5 for 25. I did try fitting a sixth model with the 25 mil bases, but it just didn't work. 5 is the best, and you can see, well, 5 is the most, and you can see even with 5 miniatures, it's not perfect. Like, it's very weird. Only 2 would be in cover, the other 3 would be in the open. And then one final thing when it comes to smoke grenades is predicting how long it's going to last into the next activation. And with this, I mean, let's say you're running into the open. If you're running it into the open, or you're putting into a place where your opponent can shoot at you from, let's say you're behind light cover and they're on advantage, or they can, find other ways to shoot you with seek or seek light, you generally only want to risk 1 operative there, because, as I said, on average a D3 is 2 activations. So if your opponent is going first, you'll be protected for their activation and then the end of your activation, but you really want that D3, but that D3 is unreliable. Always you should be aiming for like, okay, at least I'll be 1 activation safe in the next turning point, because even if your opponent goes first, you only have 1 activation in the smoke and then you're fine for yours. But if you're going first and it only lasts for 1 activation, you can now use that operative to charge, move into safety, that kind of thing. When you put more operatives in the smoke, it becomes, you're just gambling at that point. The most I would put 2 operatives, would be 2 operatives into a risky position. But that's only if I'm trying to like do a crazy gambit. Generally, I just recommend 1 and then find another safe place to stage in case you lose initiative or the smoke grenade doesn't last as long as you want. Next, we have stun grenades. So these are the other things you can select for utility grenades. So stun grenades are for 1 action point. Select 1 enemy operative visible to and within 6 inches of this operative. That operative and each other operative within 1 inch of it takes a stun test. For an operative to take a stun test, roll 1d6. On a 3+, subtract 1 from its APL stat until the end of its next activation. An operative cannot perform this while within control range of an enemy operative, or if you have reached the total number of times your kill team can perform it. So this is quite simple, really. You can do it up to twice per turning point, and, it doesn't have to be allocated to anyone. You just pick someone visible, roll a d6, on a 3+ they're -1 APL, and then anyone else within 1 inches also takes a stun test on a d6, and then is -1 APL. Now, stun grenades are they feel reliable, but they're not, right? They always don't work. But the key thing that catches people out is the effectively 1 inch blast. So you throw D6, well, you throw 1, and then you can also hit multiple people. So it's really good onto places like Gallow Dark, where people are bunching up behind like barricades on objectives. So very useful there. Ideally, you're taking this into 2 APL teams. I see people taking it into 3 APL teams, and while I understand the methodology, obviously if it goes down, they go down to 2 APL. That's still fine for an elite operative. This is way more damaging into 2 APL teams, specifically teams like Wreckers, as well as even Vespid, who have no ways to get APL bonuses. Doing that could just make an operative useless for a turn. And the other thing with APL modification, a great way to do this is, let's say you're within range of repositioning onto an objective, but you're also within range of a stun grenade. So you can start off your activation, especially if if you're free APL, it doesn't matter. But let's say they're free APL, then you could throw the stun. If it goes off, reposition onto the objective and then secure it yourself. But those are ways you can go around it. So stun grenades aren't as complicated in terms of usefulness when it comes to smoke grenades, but they're still fun. Like, the main thing is you're looking for trying to get multiple hits if possible, and mainly using them against 2 APL teams. Sometimes it works in the elite mirror, but I don't really recommend it because you're just hoping it works on a free up, and you're usually doing it against activated models. It's much better against ready operatives if you can, but it's very useful against expended operatives. And the best way to use stuns is out on expended operatives, because remember, modifiers carry over until they next activate. So until the end of its next activation, it'll be -1 APL. So let's say your opponent is staging for a key objective. What you can do is reposition to get within 6 of them, throw a stun grenade. On a 3+ they're now -1 APL. So if they were going to move on to that point, they can't do much, but also all they can do now is effectively charge you if they have the range to, or reposition somewhere. That's why it's so damaging into 2 APL teams. The only variation you have of the stun grenade specifically is the Pox Bomb from Felgor Ravager, where their stun grenade also does mortal wounds, but I've covered, well, devastating wounds, but I've covered that more on faction guides. Generally, stun grenades are okay. I just don't really think they're that useful. Specific matchups, totally. Like I said, really good into Wreckers, really good into Vespid, especially Mandrakes as well. But otherwise, I don't really rate them. Smoke grenades are far more useful. And the other problem is, you can't take 2 utility grenades twice, so you can't take 2 smoke and 2 stun. You're locked into that selection. When it comes down to that, while you can take 1 smoke and 1 stun, ideally I'd recommend taking 2 smokes most of the time. Now we get into explosive grenades. So explosive grenades are once again like utility grenades. You select explosive grenades, then either select 2 cracks, 2 frags, or a crack and a frag. So you can't take explosive grenades twice and then pick, 2 frag grenades and 2 Krak Grenades. So you're going to have to pick. But you're allowed to double up on both, which is generally quite useful. So starting off with the Frag Grenade, it's 4 attacks, hitting on 4s, 2-4, range 6, blast 2, saturate. So it's gotten a bit worse. It now hits on 4s instead of 3s, but is now 2-4 instead of 2-3. Generally, Frag Grenades aren't great. I mean, they're okay into Horde teams, but Horde teams are very rare at the moment. Although there is one key element where I think explosive grenades for frags are the best, and that's when it comes to Gallow Dark. Because on Gallow Dark, it gets lethal 5-up, so it's 2-4, lethal 5-up. This does work on Volkers with the condensed environment, but I find that quite unreliable. It's more so depending on the map if objectives are inside the stronghold. But generally, great on Gallow Dark for that lethal 5-up. Now, when it comes to frag grenades, as I said, you generally take them into Horde, so you can kind of see how your opponent specs out after deployment. But I think there's actually one team that makes the most use out of explosive grenades when it comes to frags, and that's Corsairs. So Void's Guard Corsairs, so they have their own strategy ploy that when they get a crit, they get punishing. So generally, when you've got lethal 5-up, especially now they have access to rerolls, what's really good is, especially with the Shade Runner, teleporting in, slicing someone, then fragging them, and then if you're hitting multiple people, you're critting multiple times, hopefully, because at least one crit will force more hits via punishing, so you get a lot of chain attacks, and then you can, phase back away or move away as a Corsair. So if you're playing Gallow Dark, Corsairs are great. You can get some use out of it with Tzeentch Legionary into Ready Operatives, but that's not as great. I mean, they just charge and fight anyway. They have much more reliable ways. But I think for Corsairs, they're the best users of frag grenades, in my opinion, especially on Gallow Dark. On open, wouldn't really take frag grenades, but if you're playing into Horde teams, Gallow Dark frags are amazing. Now we have the humble Krak Grenade. This is 4 attacks hitting on 4s, 4-5 damage, range 6, piercing 1, saturate. Like the Frag Grenade, it's gone from hitting on 3s to hitting on 4s, but now you can double up, and it gives everyone easy access to piercing 1. So this is generally the most common grenade you've seen, and for good reason. It's 4-5 with piercing 1, and in general, it's very good, especially when you're running teams that are either short on piercing weapons or even saturated with them, because it just gives you ways to just punish the opponent. Krak Grenades are generally quite good. Most of the time, people are taking 2 Krak Grenades, but it does differ on what faction. Now, you would be surprised how many factions actually run Krak Grenades really well, and now I'll quickly go through all of them. So first off, for teams that kind of ensure auto hits, so they either have accurate 1 or ways to ensure hits. Firstly is Wreckers. Wreckers are one of the new kill teams, and they can use Wrecker points to basically force hits. So up to 3 times during a single action, for each Wrecker point you have, you can turn a miss into a hit. So if you statistically should get 2 hits with a Krak Grenade, you can then spend 2 Wrecker points to force that into 4 hits. So Wreckers are already a great source. Then you've got Blades of Cain. Against expended operatives, they get ceaseless when shooting, so they get ceaseless Krak Grenades. Now, when you're using a Die Avenger, when the Die Avenger is on an objective or shooting someone on an objective, they get accurate 1. So you can have an accurate 1 ceaseless Krak Grenade, which is amazing. Very, very good there. You also have Fast Talker Kinban, who have wide access to Accurate 1, thanks to their to their faction ability from their leader. So that's really good there, especially as they generally hit on 4s anyway. Then you've got Blooded, who use Blooded tokens, and they can either auto ensure a hit or a crit, and they have lots of access to rerolls, so they make Krak Grenades really good. And then you've got Novitiates. They can turn either a miss into a hit or a hit into a crit. So when you're firing Krak Grenades, they have a lot of ways to reroll and then enforce hits. So if you get 2 hits, you can reroll 1, you know, to get 3 hits and then spend a faith point to get a 4th hit. Or if you've got, you know, just rolled 4 hits, you can then spend 2 faith points to turn a normal into a crit. So those are the best auto users of Krak Grenades in terms of, as I said, they've got ways to automatically ensure hits, which makes Krak Grenades incredibly dangerous. Then you've got the more I reroll everything ability. So you've got Hand of the Archon. For a pain token, they effectively get ceaseless, and if they're also thrown at someone who's wounded, so they've lost any wounds, they get balanced. So you could have effectively relentless Krak Grenades, which is really nice. Wormblade, when they switch from conceal to engage, they get ceaseless when they shoot, so they get ceaseless cracks. Troop can give a range, an operative balance when they're shooting, so you can give a normal trooper balanced with your, you know, dancing thing, and then get a balanced Krak Grenade, which is all right. Brood Brothers with crossfire tokens get rerolls on their Krak Grenades, which is also really good. Halfkin have the special ability with proximate firepower, so if they're shooting within 6 inches, they get +1 ballistic skill. So their Krak Grenades actually hit on freeze. And then they've also got, you know, their attack order that gives them balance. So they have Krak Grenades hitting on freeze with a reroll. Really, really good. Then you've got Deathcore who get balanced with their, you know, shooting order. So really good for cracks there. Star Striders can spend a CP to get balanced within 6, and if they're also shooting within, I believe, 4 inches of the Voidmaster, someone with a Krak Grenade has 2 rerolls, so they're effectively almost ceaseless, which is really, really good. Inquisitorial Agents get ceaseless with Quarry, so they get a ceaseless crack, which is very nice. And then also Aquilans, they have ways to ensure balanced and severe for at least the first certain number of operatives when they drop in, making Krak Grenades very useful there, as well as also coming with someone who hits on freeze with Krak Grenades. And that's all the selection of teams which currently use grenades the best, specifically Krak Grenades. So you've got a wide number of teams that really use Krak Grenades quite threateningly. Obviously, standout ones are Novitiates and Halfkin. Halfkin for making Krak Grenades hit on freeze with a reroll, Novitiates for just fixing dice, and then also Wrecker Crew. You've got a wide number of teams that can surprisingly use Krak Grenades really, really well to offset the fact that they hit on 4s. So Krak Grenades are amazing. They're just so useful, whereas Frag Grenades only really become useful on Gallowdark, and specifically with Corsairs, because they have an access to a punishing ploy for when they're shooting or fighting. So overall, for the grenade overview, as I said, this is just specifically for grenades, and when you select grenades, you can either select a utility grenade or explosive grenades, and you can't double up, so you can't select explosive grenades twice or utility grenades twice. So if you're selecting utility, you can either select 2 smokes, 2 stun, or a smoke and a stun, and if you're selecting explosives, you can either select 2 frag, 2 smoke, 2 frag, 2 crack, or a frag and a crack. So that's something important to remember. Generally, for both, smoke grenades are amazing as well as Krak Grenades. Smoke grenades are very useful when it comes to staging, especially into risky positions or trying to keep a lot of operatives safe. And I've gone through how many operatives can actually fit inside a smoke bubble, because remember, it's a 1-inch bubble from a 20mm marker, so it's actually quite wide. And then you've got stun grenades. They're okay, but they're more specifically good into 2 APL teams who don't have any really access to widespread APL modifiers or comms. Then you've got frag grenades, which are okay, but they're only really useful into horde teams and on Gallowdark, because when they're on Gallowdark, they get lethal 5-up. They do get lethal 5-up when shooting into Vulcus strongholds, but that's a more situational play. And then finally, we have Krak Grenades. Krak Grenades are 4 attacks, in on 4s, 4-5 piercing 1. They all have saturate, so you can't retain any cover saves. And while they do hit on 4s, as I said when I went through them, there's a large number of teams that either grant them rerolls when using cracks, or they have ways to fix dice either with accurate 1 or punishing to basically force through lots of hits. And once again, shout outs go to Halfkin with proximate firepower, having their Krak Grenades hits on freeze, and then with attack order gain a reroll. Novitiates being able to fix dice with their acts of faith, and then Wrecker Crew being able to force hits with Wrecker points. So you can actually see, despite cracks hitting on 4s, they have lots of utility, which is why they're commonly picked quite a lot, even against teams that have ways to ignore piercing. But there's not really much else to cover for the grenades. It's just kind of, hopefully this helped, because I've gone through what makes them useful. As I said, I really love smokes because they're great for staging. They're really good, especially if you have lots of ways to have free APL or use extra activations, because all of a sudden into shooting teams that don't have ways to ignore obscuring, you can do stuff like charge, fight, kill, drop a smoke, or even like stage up into the open with smokes, forcing the opponent to come closer to you. And it's really useful on kill zones like Gallo Dark and Beta Decima, whereas Krak Grenades are just great, you know? Even just taking Krak Grenades without any sort of other buff, you can always spend a CP to reroll, and if you roll hot, that's great, and if they roll bad, you've got another Krak Grenade in the bank. So it's a win-win. But hopefully this helped with explaining grenades, because there's quite a bit of depth. And especially with smoke grenades, I think the thing that throws people off the most is how many people can actually fit inside a smoke bubble. But that's pretty much it from me today. Please remember to like and subscribe as well as comment. Let me know what you thought of today's video. Did you find it useful and helpful? Remember, I've got a Discord you can check out in the episode description below, an affiliate link at Element Games, an affiliate link and discount code at Crossfire Games, and a Patreon if you want to give me some more support. And I'm just going to quickly shout out my patrons. So for my adepts of the Crev, Tom, Supercow, Sam, Nick, Mercenary Q, Mr. Meatworld, Lucas, Jeremiah, Graham, Fangzu, Draken, Dave Meatsworld, Darcy, Dan, Dad of Goldens, Chris, and Morpheum. And then for my veterans of the Crev, Sandra and Mark. So thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot to me and helps support the channel. But yeah, that's another guide out of the way. I'll have more tips and tricks as I, disperse my knowledge away. But hopefully it's useful. These tips and stuff and guides have been seemingly received quite helpfully. So hopefully they're helping improve people on how they play. As I said, I used to write off Krak Grenades until I actually saw them in action and then realized how many teams really make Krak Grenades stand out really well, especially like stuff like Blades of Cain. It's surprising. Like if it ever became a problem, I guess you could say Krak Grenades could only benefit from the CP reroll. But, it's interesting how that's worked out, especially as everyone thought 2 Krak 8-on-4s was good anyway, and it turns out a lot of teams make that even better. And then, stun grades are okay, but smokes are just way more useful for their reliability. And then frags kind of work sometimes. But remember, no matter what type of grenade you're using, remember you always have a chance to win, as long as you can roll a crit.